Welcome to Lesson 9, Materials. Right away, we'll learn how to select, view, and edit materials for any object or character. We'll break down the structure of procedural shaders, their nodes, and the channels that drive material properties. We'll also check out the root nodes for Firefly versus Superfly shaders. Next, we'll glance at organizational features like compound nodes and material layers, as well as wacro shortcuts that quickly set up material building tasks. Finally, we'll load, modify, and store material presets and render the results. Alright, let's jump right in. Okay, let's get right into materials, and we're picking up right where we left off with the Pauline sunset scene in the lighting video we did. And I brought in the Robo Kitty. It looks like they have a nice Thelma and Louise moment here on the edge of the canyon. But I really want both characters because they're going to be helpful in learning materials. Look at how different their materials look. We can explore this and see how to create different surfaces. With Kitty, it looks very metal and shiny, mostly because of these highlight specular areas that we see here. And notice that Pauline's skin and clothing and hair don't have those specular highlights. And this is exactly the way things behave in real life. Metal things and shiny objects have higher specular values than duller things like clothing and human skin. Unless, of course, the human skin is wet or sweaty. In that case, it would have specularity, such as the eyes here. Eyes are moist, so they do have specularity. Now, before we explore this further in the material room, we can actually do one powerful material editing function right here in the pose room with this color tool in our tool palette. It looks like a paint bucket. And if I select that tool and then select the purple arm of Kitty, I can have all these color options to change the main diffuse color. And I get this nice real-time preview of the changes before I even make a selection. And so I'm just going to pick a nice pink here and stick with this Thelma and Louise scene. Two gals just hanging out at the Grand Canyon. Let's explore the materials further in the material room. For the most part, all of our existing palettes are still here from the pose room. We just have this material workspace. And you want to make sure you're on the Advanced tab. We've got the simple view here. We'll come back to that in a second. Just bear with me and stay on the Advanced tab. We also have a new tool in the material room. It's selected by default. It's the Material Select tool. And if we just select on anything in the scene preview, automatically its materials and all the material settings pop up in our material workspace. So it's a very easy way to just select a material, be able to view it, and then edit it in any way we want. If I select Pauline's face, now it changes to all the material settings for that material group for her face. Now, some things are a little trickier to select. These eyes are underneath a face shield, and so I can't select the eye. In this case, you want to come down to your material list dropdown. Now, anytime I select something, it automatically selects that figure or object here in the object dropdown, and then we have all the materials that are associated with that figure or object. And so then we could access the different parts of the eye right here. And now I've got all of its material properties that I can edit right here. And so let's get back to the Kitty here. And we know that we've got all these different channels here and properties for the different materials. If I select on that diffuse color, I can make the same change that we did a minute ago using the color tool. And now Kitty is a Seattle Seahawks fan. So now we're going to explore a lot of these channels. For some people, this can be a bit overwhelming, all this control. So we can come to the simple view, and here we only have a handful of the most basic and commonly used channels to affect the material of this material group. We got that diffuse color. We got the specular, or here it's renamed as highlight. We have the ambient channel, the reflection, transparency, and bump. All together, these channels create this material preview. All their effects combined, and this is what is going to be applied to the surface. So you got a lot of control in the simple view, but when you really want to have maximum control, we can find all these channels and more here in the advanced view. So to break it down, this is our main root node where all of our base channels are stored. And as you can see, if those aren't enough, you can attach even more nodes to create more options with more channels, and creating an entire network, a procedural node network involving multiple channels and multiple nodes all attached to your root node. So altogether, this is a procedural node network. In short, this is what's referred to as a shader. if we click on Pauline's skin, we can see it's a much more advanced shader with many more nodes, creating a more advanced network. So let's get back to the shader for the green material here. And we know about the diffuse color. We can crank up or decrease its value. Same with specular, but you also have this highlight size, which is going to control the size of the specular highlights. And so if I enter in a value like 1, see how much bigger they get? This is how you can control what kind of material that you want to be working with here. These top 5 channels between your diffuse, specular, and highlight, this is the main channels that dictate, is this going to be metal? Is it going to be skin? Is it going to be stone or wood? And so you really want to at least have those channels down. And of course, these are all found in your simple tab as well. Now, the ambient color, we could use it for a glow or to emit light like we did in the past videos. However, you don't have to have it glow. If you give it some color and just a smaller value, you could simply have it flood your object with color like so. And anytime you have a value of 0, the color is irrelevant and that channel will not be used. Now, if we grab the transparency channel and give it, say, a 0.5, look at how it starts to become semi-transparent. We can see through it. If you go to 1, it completely disappears like so. Now, you could apply texture maps to any of these channels. If you did it to transparency, you would have this really interesting transparency pattern based off any grayscale or black and white image map that you attach here. So I'll just take that back down to 0. We got some additional settings for transparency if you want. Now, another important one is reflection. And so as you can see, the kitty is made of metal, so we have reflection going on. And if you had something such as glass or liquids, you could activate refraction right here. Now, bump and displacement, those are very similar. They basically control how rough a surface is. Now, kitty doesn't have bump or displacement because it's just smooth metal. But if we click on, say, Pauline's face, there's some displacement. That's because human skin has moles, pores, nice different levels of subtle roughness. And if we click on, say, her shirt, you can see it's got a bump map there. And all your nodes have this collapsible toggle for the channel details as well as the preview for that node. And so here's the texture map for the bump. And we can see this bumpy pattern that's going to end up rendering and make it look like it's got a nice rough bumpy texture for that shirt. And so we can just click on the different body parts like her face and see that it also has some displacement as well. Now, displacement takes bump further and actually extrudes the bump map into expanded, extruded geometry that extends off the surface of your object. Now, let's go back to the kitty here. And those are all your main, most common channels that you're going to want to work with. And let's go ahead and explore the color channel again. We can see how kitty is getting its color on this green channel here. It's nothing but a simple color. Pauline's face, though, is getting color in a very different way. It's an image map. I'll expand the preview for this node, and we can even expand the channel details. And we can see it probably came from Photoshop. If we go in here, this is the image that it's referencing. Here in this folder, we can see all the images for the different material groups for Pauline. And this is just mapped to this diffuse color channel. And this image is giving Pauline's face all her color. So 2 different ways you could either create images in another program and map them to your character, or in the case of the kitty, you can just create simple colors and then play with nice shading effects to give it more detail. So different ways about color. There's even more, and we'll explore a few more a bit later. So back to the structure of these nodes here. We know that we've got root nodes. We can expand and collapse the channel details, even the material preview. And so whether it's the kitty or if it's Pauline's face, we have control over these different nodes. Now, the material preview per node, that's just for that node. The root node, this material preview is for all the channel information and all the nodes and their channels all piped together to create this shader. And that's the final preview for the shader right there that's applied to Pauline. So let's go ahead and get back to kitty for a simpler view, a less intense shader here. And I'm going to drop these down, collapse these different views here. And up until Poser 10, there was only one type of root node, the Poser surface node. Now with Poser 11, we have a new render engine, the Superfly render engine. And so there's 2 additional root nodes, 3 different types of shader networks that we can create. if we come up to this little white triangle here, we have all of our node options. We can cut, copy, paste, delete, and we can also create the new nodes, root nodes, and all the subnodes to attach to create big shader networks. Likewise, if you right-click in your material workspace, you got the same menu here. And so here's the 3 different root nodes. We're already working with the poser surface node. Let's go ahead and select and create the other 2 types. There's the physical surface node. And I'll go back in and grab the 3rd and final node, the cycles surface node. Let me explain the differences between these 3 root nodes. The poser surface node was originally optimized for the Firefly render engine, and these 2 nodes are going to be optimized for your Superfly render engine. However, any of the 3 nodes will still render in any of the 2 render engines that you decide. You're just going to have more optimized results when you use the nodes that were intended for the render engine associated with it. Now, why are there 2 different Superfly nodes? Well, the Cycles surface node, you will find this familiar if you come from Blender. This is based off of the open source Cycles rendering technology and shader network system found in Blender. Now, the physical surface root node is equally intended for the Superfly render engine for physical-based rendering. However, as you can see, you get a more expansive list of channels from the get-go. So you don't have to start building a node network. You can get going right away with the root node. And in both cases, you can, of course, add more nodes to build a more complex shader. Now, you'll notice each root node has these checkboxes above it that say Firefly and Superfly. Now, basically, even though they're all interchangeable, Poser will only recognize one shader per render engine. Right now, both render engines are referencing the Poser surface shader. If I checkbox the physical surface shader for Superfly, it checkboxes this one now as the active shader that the Superfly engine will recognize. And so this Cycles node, because it's not checked at all, it's irrelevant and none of the render engines are going to recognize it. So we could have multiple root nodes or shaders active in our material workspace in each material group, and we can toggle between experimenting with the different shaders and using them in the different rendering engines. So you have a lot of control here. And basically that is the structure of your root nodes and where your shaders will stem from. Now, when you want to start adding more subnodes to your initial root node, we can go back into that node menu, and everything starting with the math category and below, these are all your subnodes, several different categories here. We worked with the 2D textures to apply image maps, and there's lots of other possibilities. Now, the math through 2D textures category, that's all the original Firefly nodes, and the Cycles category, this is going to be all your physical surface nodes and your cycle nodes. So go ahead and explore, and let's go ahead and apply one. If we grab, say, 3D textures and go to clouds, we get this nice, I'll expand its material preview. It looks like an image map, but it's not. We could change its color, and it's totally a procedural node here, and it's basically a fractal being self-generated inside Poser. And we can change its values to change its shape. And now I can plug it in, I can take its output and plug it into the input of any of our shaders and root nodes. And if I change this to white, it'll recognize all the color from the subnode here. And now we can see these clouds popping up on our surface. Sometimes, if you get into really complex shaders, you're not going to get a real-time preview, but usually you will. And not only can we pipe that into our Poser surface node, it can get piped into any of the shaders as well. And so lots of infinite control here. Now, beyond building custom shaders and editing them, you can also apply material presets. Let's just come over here in our material preset library, and you'll notice there's a lot of stuff here that was especially built for certain characters and props, but this basic materials folder, this is full of all types of goodies, different categories like brick, fantasy, glass, metal, stone, wood. Let's go ahead and just load a few. Now, these were all originally built around the Firefly render engine. But like I said, they'll render in any of them. And if I can either double click with this current material group selected or just click and drag and drop it right on any material group body part that I want. And now we can see what's going on. And it's a very simple node system here, a very simple shader. And not only do you have these Firefly shaders here, these Firefly material presets, if I just collapse out of there and come down to Superfly, there's some really cool Superfly presets as well. And under Natural, it has a brick pattern as well. But notice, because it's a Superfly, it's going to attach it to a physical cycles shader. If I double click it, there we go. And it looks like it's attaching all these nodes and channels to a physical surface root node shader that is all set to render in either of the render engines. So lots of possibilities here. I highly recommend taking a good look at the different material presets and just looking at the different material shaders on all your current characters that you're working with, and you can slowly start to learn how they're put together. Now there's something else here in the material room. You've got this feature here called layers. If you want to get really advanced, you can start building multi-layered shaders. One effect I can think of is, let's say you're working with Pauline here. I'll select her material. If you wanted to have all her skin on one layer, but makeup and tattoos on a second layer, you could certainly do that. That way you could make changes to the channels and the nodes on her skin, but if you had a layer that was above the base layer, by just creating a new layer here, you could then keep your lipstick, makeup, and tattoos unaffected by change you do on your skin layer. A lot of control and flexibility here. Another handy feature is if you start getting lost in all these nodes, you can basically just start Command or Control or Shift select as many nodes as you want, and then if you right click, you can check Collapse to Compound Node, and look what happens. It basically bundled all those nodes into a compound node, tidying up our workspace here. And if we want access to those individual nodes, we could just enter that compound node here, and here they all are. We can see them and make any edits to them we want, and then we can just simply go back into our previous view to see the root node with that compound node attached. So a lot of flexibility. It's really endless and infinite. My job is just to show you the basic structure of the node system, the procedural networks, and how to build shaders. Now, there's these things here up on the right-hand side. These are your wacro shortcuts. They're these buttons that set up some work and common tasks for you so you don't have to do the work yourself. We did one with the IBL, setting up an IBL light, and it automatically prompted to load the image and created the associated nodes. And so a similar workflow with these wacros can help you achieve other tasks, such as set up ambient occlusion on a per material group level. If you don't want to be bound by the entire light settings for ambient occlusion, you could dial up or down your ambient occlusion settings per material group. Set up light style. Well, you could set up a diffuse only or specular only material arrangement for your lights so that you can use lights to only create highlights and specularity, turning down the diffuse, or vice versa. Next up is create atmosphere. You can generate volumetric atmospheres in your poser scenes like fog and smoke, but I have to warn you, they're very time intensive as far as rendering goes, and they can be very tricky to work with. Set up tune render. You can do away with all this complex texture maps and so on and have nice, simple colored tune shaders to create nice cartoon effects, doing some interesting things there. You can read up more about that in your poser reference manual as well as everything else. And then you can set up shadow catcher. You can have just the shadowing rendering for your particular elements and leave the objects themselves off, but only render their shadows on a per material group level. Next up, you can simply add subsurface scattering, a powerful realistic skin effect to your character's skin. And then these last two, just a nice easy button here to add reflections or refractions and setting up the appropriate nodes. So these wacros are nice time savers. Now let's go ahead and go back to the pose room. And what I did is I just deleted the characters here, and I went into the props folder under primitives, and I just loaded a ball, a simple sphere. And I pre-rendered a lot of the material settings in the Superfly section and the basic material section here in our material preset library. There's really a lot of goodies here. I rendered out a dozen or so presets for you. So here's the simple sphere I loaded in the same lighting. Here's a nice concrete, and they're all applied to the same ball. And here we can see tile, and it's obviously got a displacement applied to it because we can see the displacement actually displacing and extruding the geometry of the ball. And then we've got a velvet material here. This is a cool sort of glowing electron look. And these are all from the library, presets, and I didn't modify them at all. A flame effect here. We can again see displacement, probably some bump map in addition to it. And we've got this nice transparent glass effect. And this is cool. And here's an example of just the bump, because you can see the surfaces are not being extruded out from the edge of the ball. And then we've got this sort of wood paneling surface here. We've got a nice pearlescent preset here. This one's interesting. Another wood effect here. Some more wood paneling. And this nice rocky texture. These are all from your material preset library. So if you like stuff that you see here, explore your materials, check them out, and you can learn how to build your own shaders. And at the very least, they're pretty easy to edit, as we've seen. So now that we've got a pretty good understanding of how to edit materials from a basic way even into an advanced way, and how important it is to getting the exact looks we want as far as style and quality, why don't we apply some of this learning really quickly to our past Jedi mission scene and make it look even cooler. I'm going to come over to the scenes category where I saved out that last version in my Poser Projects custom library. I saved it under Jedi Mission and I labeled it Jedi IBL for image-based light. I'm going to hit the single check mark to fully replace the scene. So let's go ahead and come down to the last render we left off on. Here it is here. Now we got great lighting. We're getting a nice realistic atmospheric soft bounce light, nice sunlight, but it looks like the specular is basically doing nothing for us on the surface of the ship itself. And I think because I see specular on Andy, it has to do with the ship and not the light. So let's go ahead and jump into the material room. And I'm going to work on from the advanced tab here. And I can just click with our material select tool right on the hull of the ship. And just as I suspected, look, there's no specular color at all. I'm not really sure why this wasn't set up, but we can actually customize it to suit our needs. So right away, I'm going to select on that black color, and I'll just copy, select from that white color from the diffuse above. Right away, look what we got here. We got this nice, beautiful specular highlight running right across the bow of the ship there. And I'll just make one adjustment. I'm going to bring the specular value down to 0.7. I think it's a little hot and intense. And I'm going to bump up the highlight size of that specularity. I'm going to bump it all the way up to 0.1 to make it more broader across the bow of that ship there. Next, I'm going to select the wing of the ship here. And I'll do the same exact thing. I'll make it white. And I'll leave the value at 1, but I'm going to jump the highlight size up to 0.1 as well. There we go. We're looking good already, and we just barely began. Now, the next thing I want to do is select the canopy here of this glass here, and I don't think it looked real at all. Now, unfortunately, it's going right through the object, and it's selecting our background, so we're going to have to get clever and select the very side of it over here. Now, it's called glass, and so if you're having a hard time selecting it, you can just find it under the drop-down here called glass. And first of all, why is it blue? Let's go ahead and grab the white version of that blue all the way at the top of that slider. There we go. That's much better. So a value of 1 is great there. Let's give it some specular as well. I'll just copy that white from that same value. I'll leave the specular value at 1. And let's see, I'll go ahead and leave the highlight size right where it's at. What I do want to do here is give it some reflection. And we can do that with this reflection wacro shortcut, the very top one. Just hit add reflection. Bam! Simply adds reflection in a GIF. We can see the update here in our material preview. It's looking way cooler. I don't want it to be overblown unrealistically with reflection, so we'll bring it down its value to say 0.3, and we'll keep things nice and subtle and realistic. So moving on, I want to select these pipes here, these exhaust pipes. I never really liked how those look. They look kind of funny, and so let's go ahead and see what we can add to this. Let's go into our material preset library, and back in our basic materials, what I'm going to do is come down to, I'm going to close out brick and tile, and I'm going to go into metals. Now don't forget your Superfly materials in addition to the basic materials. There's a lot of interesting things, but because the basic materials have been around for so many years, there's just so many more options in here. And I'm going to grab this hammered still under metals. And now that I've got the exhaust pipes already selected, I can just double click on this material. And there it is. It automatically adds it to it. Now, I don't think it actually looks that great yet. I want to convert this material from where it's at into something more of a gunmetal, sort of gunmetal chrome kind of look. So first thing we can do to get a chrome look is dial down the diffuse color to nearly black. Almost charcoal black there. And the next thing I want to do is probably bump the specular value up to 2. And the highlight size, I'm going to leave that at 0.1. Now, this is a little recipe here I'm giving you for some nice chrome effects. And it's going to be somewhat based off of, because it came from a hammered still preset, I like this bump map that it's already got attached to it through this fractal node here. So I also want to add reflection. And we can do that by again hitting the add reflection wacro up here. Does all the work for us. And I'm going to make this nice and reflective like a chrome pipe, but not too much. So its reflection value, I'm going to bring that down to 0.5. There we go. And I'll just collapse these nodes here to keep things simplified. Bring them up there. And this bump is a bit strong. We can see the effect here. If I bump it up to say 0.1, you can really get a sense of what bump does. I don't want it to be so strong, so I'm just going to make it say 0.01, something like that. A very slight ripple that you can barely notice. That's really all I think we need to do. Let's do one more thing. You see these little vent pipes here? Let's give them the same material, but we can save ourselves some work by creating a preset based on what we just created for our own custom gunmetal chrome. So let's go ahead and in our material library here, I'm going to collapse the main Poser 11 content folder. I'm going to go into my custom Poser projects library. I'm going to create a new folder here, and you can call it whatever you want. How about I'll just call it my materials and click on that folder there, and I'm going to save this material, and you can save the whole material collection of everything attached to the ship or just our current material right here. And so I'm going to label this gunmetal chrome, and that's it. Hit OK, and it saved it in here. There it is. And now if I come up here, if I just select our vent pipes with our material select tool, we're now on that material, and we can just double click on that material we saved out, and now it's applied. So we're now using our own creations to create something very cool. I'm going to go back to the pose room and go up to render, render settings, and I just want to make sure we're back in the Superfly render engine. Here we go here, and I'll just hit render now. Let me bring my progress bar over from my second monitor, and I think this is going to really help out. As you can see, we've worked a lot with diffuse and specular and highlight size, reflections, and bumps. These are really the core channels for your material settings that can really bump up your materials to get more closer to the real world objects that you're trying to emulate. Look at this. Way better. Look at the beautiful highlights here. Look at these nice gunmetal chrome pipes we got sporting on this Jedi ship here. We got reflections on our glass canopy. All in all, it's way, way better. So what I'm going to do is just select that last render. I'm going to come down, find our last render, right click, set it as our compare image, and now we can scrub back and forth and compare. That's where we last left off with image-based lighting, and bam, image-based lighting with playing with materials, and quite a different look here. Now this is just having some fun, keeping it simple, and still operating on a basic level. Of course, we can get even better once we start playing with the render settings, but I hope you're learning a lot about how powerful it is and easy to just do basic adjustments with your material editing and applying your material presets. So explore all the characters that you load up and the props, view how those shaders were constructed, and you can start to construct your own based off what you learn from your loaded characters, as well as looking at the shaders for the presets and how those were constructed. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you on the next video.